Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled 99 Plus Siebel CTMS Best Practices You Should Follow, presented by Perficient's Param Singh, who is the Director of Clinical Operations Solutions. My name is Eugene Stefanov. I'm the Marketing Manager for Perficient's Life Sciences practice. Before I turn it over to Param, I'd like to cover some basic housekeeping items and then provide a brief overview of our company. All participants on this call will be in listen mode, which means that everyone is on mute. You can submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature, which is located on your left side of the screen. Please do make sure you state your questions clearly and keep in mind that other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments for that matter. Your question to the speaker will be anonymously addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information about our services, feel free to use the contact information provided in the presentation. You can also fill out the contact form found on Perficient's website. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within several days. A link to the slides will also be included as well. All right, now that we've covered the logistics, let's just move on to a quick overview of Perficient. We are an IT and management consulting company that offers a host of IT solutions for a variety of industries, including, of course, life sciences, as well as healthcare, financial services, consumer products, as well as a couple of others. We have employees and offices all over the world, including the locations you see on the slide here in front of you. And as you may expect, most of our clients are based in North America and Europe. This slide here contains a bunch of facts. Just to point out a few, we were founded in 1997. We are a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. And lastly, at the moment, we have a little over 2,500 employees. All right, so what is it that Perficient really does? The short answer is everything, of course. We offer our clients many different types of digital experience, business optimization, and technology solutions. That's anything from business process management and information management, all the way to content management systems to portals. But since most of you on the call are part of the clinical IT sphere, I'll just mention what it is we do, specifically when it comes to life sciences IT applications. So we cover data management in EDC, safety and pharmacovigilance, clinical trial management, data warehousing, analytics, as well as the very hot topic of precision medicine. As far as services go, we provide what you would expect from any other IT services company. That includes, of course, consulting, implementations, upgrades, cloud hosting, application support, project management. The list goes on and on. But like I mentioned before, we provide services that relate to many other areas inside a typical life sciences company. So for example, our life sciences team could be implementing Siebel CTMS for a pharma, while Perficient's Microsoft team could be implementing Office 365 at the same time at the same company. So that's a little bit about Perficient, and that covers all the housekeeping items. So I'd like to now pass it over to today's speaker, Param Singh.
Thanks, Eugene. Let me start out by introducing myself. My name is Param Singh. I lead the clinical trial management or clinical operations solution practice within Perficient Life Sciences. I've been with Perficient a little over 7.5 years now. I've been working within the life science area or clinical trial management area for over 15 years, and through that time really been focusing on implementations of Siebel Clinical CTMS specifically, We're doing some more work now with other applications as well, other than Siebel CTMS, but now been part of over 30 plus implementations and integrations with the solution. So just a little bit about what we do within our practice. From an implementation standpoint, we're doing implementations of Siebel Clinical and Ascend. And like I mentioned, we are getting into other applications as well, other CTMS applications. We're also doing custom-built CTMS applications and rollout of that as well. If you've been on some of our other webinars, you know that we do a lot of work in the integration space between CTMS and other clinical and safety systems. We also provide process guidance, so process consulting, really around, again, clinical operations for the most part, specifically, CTMS and how that fits in within your IT and process landscape, and also training. So those are some of the services, a glimpse of some of the services that our practice specifically offers. So that's really all I wanted to cover from an introduction standpoint. We do have a lot of content today related to our topic, which is best practices, related to CTMS, and a lot of that has to do with Siebel Clinical specifically. So I apologize if I move quickly through the content today. We have a lot to cover. We may actually go over the hour that's allotted. So in those cases, just want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you do have to drop off, that the full content of the webinar will be recorded. And in this case, we don't get to questions at the end, or all of the questions at the end of the webinar. Again, we'll try to address those questions over email. So as you submit those questions along the way, again, if we have time at the end, we'll try to address as many questions at the end. If not, we'll actually reach out to you via email. So let's get started. So first, what is the best practice? We've listed 3 definitions of what a best practice is on this slide. So as you can see here, even though it's stated a bit differently, all of the definitions really indicate that a best practice is a proven method of performing a task or a function that result in a consistent, effective, and superior result. So obviously those attributes are all things that we want to achieve on a daily basis when we're managing our clinical trials within Siebel Clinical. And the end result of consistent use of a best practice is an increase in the efficiency and quality of trial management, as well as the savings in time and money. So, let's focus on some of the specific best practices and tips and tricks that we can follow when using Siebel Clinical. So the first topic, which is always a favorite, is standard operating procedures, SOPs. Ideally, an analysis and a review of your organization's current business processes and existing gaps within that processes were performed during the requirements gathering and design stage of your CTMS project. So this type of analysis should always be performed early on in a project of this nature when we're rolling out a CTMS. So in that way, during your implementation, you have the chance to update your SOPs and work practices in relation to the application that's going to be implemented, and in this case, Siebel Clinical. The existence of up-to-date SOPs are going to enable standard trial management across the organization and result in consistent and effective clinical practices across the board. So a couple of SOPs of specific value for Siebel Clinical are going to be system-specific SOPs that you create. So one of them is a Siebel Clinical or CTMS administration and maintenance SOP, and the Siebel Clinical access and use SOP. But a lot of your other clinical trial SOPs are going to be system agnostic. But these two, so the Siebel Clinical administration and maintenance SOP describes the roles and responsibilities of clinical administrators, Siebel administrators, database administrators, network administrators, in relation to the setup, administration, and maintenance of your Siebel CTMS system. And the Siebel Clinical Access and Use SOP outlines the roles and responsibilities of system users, user managers, and IT in regards to system access requests, access approvals, and configuration. So as a rule, SOPs should be finalized prior to go live, and they should be included as part of your user training. The next is work instructions. So once your SOPs are in place and any Siebel CTMS configurations or customizations, design changes have been finalized, it's time to create work instructions for your users. The work instructions should be finalized again before go live and also should be included as part of user training. They serve as step-by-step guides on how to perform standard functions within the application, and are going to ensure that everyone is doing things in the same manner. So in addition to work instructions, quick reference guides are also a great tool that users typically find it easier to refer to than user guides or online help. So these work instructions and quick reference tools really help users have that confidence in the ability of using the system correctly and consistently. And they also tend to increase user acceptance and user adoption, since they really decrease frustration for a novice or a beginner user and are seen as both user-friendly and a time-saving resource. Next is user responsibilities. Responsibilities within Siebel control the access to the screens and the views that are visible to each logged-in user. So during the design and development phase of an implementation, a review and or creation of a clinical organizational chart should be performed to determine the roles and responsibilities that each user is going to need to have in order to perform their assigned tasks within the application. So from that review, you should be able to create what we call a user access matrix to apply to the in Siebel. So as part of that process, it's important to keep the total number of responsibilities or user types to a minimum in order to lessen the complexity of the assignment and maintenance of those system users. So for example, when analyzing your roles and responsibilities, if two different types of team members will perform similar but not exactly the same function within Siebel Clinical, determine whether or not those two user types could be assigned the same application and responsibility instead of creating two different, slightly different user types. So you can think of it as a study manager and maybe a lead CRA. Sometimes they're performing very, very similar functions within the application. So you may not need to create actually two different roles, but actually create one so you can maintain it easier, and then control, have some process controls in place instead. Also, remember that even though it's tempting to allow the majority of your users to access most, if not all, of the clinical information that's maintained within the application, everyone who's involved in a protocol or a study shouldn't necessarily have access to all of the information about that study. So a key area, for example, is payments. Right, so payments are things that are located on their own individual views and modules within the application. So there's, these responsibilities can be used to limit that visibility. So it's important to balance the availability of up-to-the-minute data with the need to keep those tight controls over that data access. So only users with a legitimate need to access the data should be provided authorization to those specific views and records. So while responsibilities in Siebel CTMS control the access to the screens and the views, what user positions do is control access to the actual data or the individual records within the system in some cases. So position is a unique identifier that can be assigned to each Siebel CTMS user. In other words, records are assigned to or associated with positions instead of being assigned to individual users. So it's a one-to-one mapping between user and a position. So the creation of positions within Siebel CTMS is a critical administrative function, but it tends to often result in confusion and unexpected errors. So it is an administrative function, but it's important for system users to have a basic understanding of the general theory behind the use of positions to really use it effectively. To simplify the maintenance of user positions associated with employee turnover or internal reorganization, we highly recommend the naming convention for assignments for positions should correspond to your clinical organizational chart that we mentioned earlier. So we strongly discourage using individual names for the assignment of these positions. So a clear example is a user position should be named something like study manager or internal CRA, external CRA, instead of actually the name of the individual user, Joe Smith or Sally Jones, etc. Since multiple individuals all often have the same job function, you can also create and append 1, 2, 3 on those position names. So you have study manager 1, study manager 2, etc. So you have these different sort of positions within your clinical operations group that's going to be accessing the system. So to emphasize the point around positions, let's say Jane Jones is an internal CRA and she's decided to leave the company. So the data records that have been assigned to Jane Jones, instead of an actual, let's say, CRA number 2, then we, as an administrator, we would have to reassign all of those data records to the new employee. But since it's assigned to an actual position, when Jane Jones leaves, we basically take the position of CRA 2 and assign it to the new employee. So a new position doesn't have to be created. We just simply assign that position to the new user. And so that way, all of the things that have been assigned to Jane are now assigned to the new employee. So this is how user positions sort of work within the application. So we mentioned that each position should be assigned to only one user. Likewise, a user should only be assigned one position if possible, since a user can only log into the application using one position at a time. You're still able to assign multiple positions to a single user, and really that's meant for when, again, somebody leaves and you're temporarily assigning that position to somebody in-house, before you replace that person from one employee to another. So really, you can do that, but again, normal state is going to be one user be assigned one position. So along with discussion of responsibilities of positions, we also want to remind you that user accounts should never be deleted. So when a user leaves or when an employee leaves, you don't necessarily want to delete that user because there's history tied to it. So what we recommend doing is disabling that user. And to disable the user, you simply just remove those responsibilities that are associated with that user and disassociate them from their old position and potentially assign them to an inactive, generic inactive position. List of values, list of available values for drop-down fields in Siebel CTMS should be strictly controlled as well. The application comes with standard out-of-the-box values for fields, but these are often modified to meet each organization's internal nomenclature and use. So it's important that someone is charged with maintaining the LOVs or list of values that specific guidelines and controls are set in place for the modification and update of those LOV options. So we recommend the use of a list of values request form to manage requests for system use for the creation, modification, or inactivation of an LOV option within Siebel Clinical. Since these are globally, when you change an LOV, it's a global change across the entire application. So when you have a request, it needs to be verified that that's a valid change to make. So in addition, an up-to-date spreadsheet should be maintained that lists out all the drop-down fields and their associated value options. All modifications, again, should be reviewed and approved by a representative sample of the business users. Only a couple of administrated users should have the access necessary to do these modifications, and then maintaining a history of all of those modifications and changes should be maintained for future reference as well. It's also important to know that modification of some LOVs can actually adversely impact the Siebel functionality. So there are certain system-driven LOVs that need to be maintained. So as you're modifying these lists, you want to make sure that you're not modifying lists that are used by internally by the Siebel application. So continuing with LOVs, you want to avoid LOV modifications that could result in values being displayed improperly or even at all. So an example of that is changing all the list of values to uppercase. So that's just going to it's not going to be displayed properly. Also, do not assume that modifying a display value will automatically update records that have been populated with the old value. So an example is if we change the account type option of central lab to reference lab in the list of values administration, the list of values that are available are going to change, but the option of reference lab is going to only be available for the drop-down list. But the records that already exist where the account type was previously entered as central lab are going to still display central lab in that account type field. So if you're making these types of modifications, you have to update the values of the records that are already within the system. So there might be a data migration activity that needs to be done as well. So a couple of other maintenance tips to be aware of. LOVs are managed by the administrator in the administration data list of value section of the application. We recommend that you never delete an LOV. So instead, we recommend deactivating it or unchecking it with the active flag. And if you want value option to be displayed in the associate dropdown, make sure that active flag is checked. So if you're adding values, make sure that active flag is checked. And then after making any type of change within the administration data list of values, be sure to click the clear cache button in order for those changes to take effect. In some cases, that's going to be required. Next, the home screen. So the home screen is the first screen that's displayed when the user logs into the system. It's a convenient way to track and access records that are relevant to the logged in user. The best practice is really for each user to organize their home screen in a manner that's going to be most beneficial for their use. There's an edit layout function that allows the user to show hidden lists or sections or collapse or expand each of those lists and forms, and even restore the default layout that the system came with. So those modifications are able to be done. Those modifications are user specific, so the user can rearrange or hide their sections in such a way that, again, is most useful for them, and hide any sections that are never used by that particular user. So that edit layout is user specific, and once they make their changes on their home screen, it'll remain that way each time they log in, or until they decide to change that layout again. And the user is always able to reset their home screen to whatever the default layout was. And another best practice is for users to take advantage of the hyperlinks on the home screen list to quickly navigate to specific areas of the application. So as you become a little bit more familiar with your home screen and what's available, you can actually navigate very, very quickly to your study, your site, directly from the home screen. So list applets. A list applet in Siebel CTMS is simply a list of specific records. The layout is very similar to Excel worksheet. List applets is that the user can rearrange the way that the data is displayed by rearranging columns, by dragging and dropping them from a desired location. They can add or remove display columns via the column displayed menu option, and they can sort columns of information using the sort option within the column header, and they can also query for a specific list of results. So all of those things are possible across every list applet within the application. So the best practice is really for each user to use that capability to modify the layout of the list applet so the information that they need is visible with minimal amounts of scrolling. So these practices are often, also useful when exporting data or doing the quick print screen and views, quick printing on screens and views, which we'll talk about later as well. So one of the biggest challenges companies face when implementing a new CTMS or new system altogether is really ensuring that initial data entry and subsequent maintenance is of good, clean, up-to-date, and consistent quality. So the best way to ensure that is really to have a single document that provides explicit instructions for standard data entry and maintenance. A standard document, data standards document really ensures that the users know how and in what format data should be entered in the system. So the document should include information such as what to enter in each line of the address record, for example, the accepted or not accepted use of abbreviations in those addresses or other locations, the expected use of and values for comment fields, the format of a site number, and other company-defined standards. So standard nomenclature and definitions for important fields such as protocol, site, and subject statuses should also be included to make sure everyone has the same understanding of those similar terms. And you should also outline the steps to take to avoid duplicate records. So this data standards document is really, really important in a system implementation for CTMS. And all users should be trained on that standards document. They should know that it's mandatory that they follow these standards and be informed of any revisions to that document. So just because we're rolling out a system that has these standard fields available doesn't necessarily ensure that each user within your organization is using those fields in the same way. So this document, the standards document is key to ensuring that happens. Record properties, so there's an abbreviated audit trail for every record within a list or form applet, and that can be displayed by highlighting the record and then clicking and selecting the About Record option in either the Help dropdown or within the Menu dropdown. You can also use a keyboard shortcut, I think it's Control-Alt-K, to access the record property information. So what the About Record property shows, key information of who created the record and when. So you can see there's a time and date stamp there, and the login user. How many total times the record has been modified, the row number or the row ID, associated with that record. And these are all, and the last person that updated the record as well, and the date and time stamp. The row number is that unique ID for the record in the application that it's not duplicated anywhere else. So knowing the row ID will allow you to return to a specific record when, with complete certainty, and is really useful when troubleshooting record-related application issues. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, this is used pretty effectively. Contact, account, and addresses are key records and global entities that are used throughout the application. Because the entry and maintenance of these records are so critical, it's best for these types of records to either be centrally or regionally administered by a few detail-oriented individuals. And we don't want to open this up for all end users to be able to enter, modify, and potentially delete contact, account, and address records. So It's also important to create guidelines that control the creation and modification and activation of these records. And a couple of tools that can be used to support this process are going to be that data standards document, and then also contact account and request forms. So in addition to record entry, so in addition to record entry, the maintenance of the contacting account should follow some specific standards and guidelines. So this is especially true regarding deletion of those records. One of the most important best practices is to avoid the hard deletion of any record, but especially contact account and records, since they're global entities and they're used throughout the application. So instead, we recommend using a soft delete procedure by indicating that a record should not be used going forward based on a status value of inactive or marked for deletion. The hard delete of a contact can have really undesired consequences, since since the record is completely removed from the system upon deletion. So an example of a undesired consequences is if James Jones is a principal investigator for one or more sites and his contact record is deleted, the sites on which he was a PI also get deleted, or at least orphaned within the system, so they're not visible in the application anymore. Since PI is a required field on a site, when that record is no longer referenceable, that site actually disappears. So in the case of duplicate records, the record merge functionality can be utilized. And this is a really valuable functionality within the system. So when merging records, the data associated with each of those records are going to be associated with the post-merge surviving record. So therefore, prior to a merge, a decision must be made as to which record will survive and which record will be the source record. So once that decision is made, we recommend assigning a status such as marked for deletion, again, that soft delete, to the source record. So this can be tricky because field values in the source record are not going to exist after the merge. So when you're merging records, all the values and attributes of the surviving record are going to remain, even when that value is null, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But the source records will then disappear and only the surviving record will remain. But what's beneficial here is that all of the child records of all of the sources that made up for that merge are now going to point to the surviving record. So it's done by an administrator, but you're not losing any data, and there's no reason to delete anything if all we're doing is maintaining and addressing these duplicates. So this is done in an administration screen or administration user that's being able to do this, and you can do that through the edit menu, selecting the records and then merging them and resulting in one surviving record. So for contact records, we encourage a standard practice of indicating the contact main contact type at the contact level, and identifying study and site-specific roles for the contact at the site level. So for example, when you're entering in Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones can be a PI for site A and a consultant for site B, or key contributor to a study, and that could be his role. But as a contact record, we indicate that he is a physician. So it's basically what that contact is outside the context of a site or a study. So when you're entering in contacts or accounts, we want to pick something that's more generic or more indicative of who that organization or who that person is. Next point talks about assessment templates. We strongly encourage companies to utilize the contact and account assessment functionality in Siebel. it's really best to create standard assessment templates using really objective assessment criteria and answer scales. So these templates can be used and compared over time and provide information to assist with site, investigator, and vendor selection process, because then we can actually look at high performance or high performing investigators and sites for future studies. And important to remember that the same assessment can be applied to a contact or account multiple times. So if we're using a contact on multiple studies, you can use that same assessment template on each, multiple times to assess their performance on each study. And the final point here is that contact housekeeping function. We encourage companies to confirm that the employees, so your system users, are not displayed in their contact list. So this is something that you can do within Siebel. So when you're entering in users to the application, they're also entered in the same sort of table as your regular contacts. So, but these can be filtered out by an administrator. So the result is a decrease in the number of contacts that display in your contact list, and it also ensures that a company employee or a system user is not accidentally selected as a site contact or a contact reference. So it's purely external contacts that you're looking at. So previously we discussed the deletion of contact and account records, but I want to once again emphasize that the general rule of thumb in Siebel is going to be do not delete records. And that includes templates that have been applied potentially. So the effect of a deletion of any record must be assessed before that delete button is clicked. So the deletion of a single record can cause unanticipated issues with other associated records, and this is known as a cascade, cascade delete or a cascading effect. So in addition, deletion of some types of records have more negative impact than deletion of others. So for example, deleting a site document is not going to have a significant impact on the system, but the deleting a subject can delete any orphan activity records like subject visits and activities that have already been paid for. So that's an example there. So if you do decide to do a delete for any reason, be sure you're deleting from the bottom of the hierarchy to the top. So for example, if you're deleting, trying to delete a subject, make sure you go down to the activities level, or if you're deleting a subject, start at the bottom of the hierarchy and not at the top. And again, when we're deleting a contact or an account, that you need to be 110% certain that that contact and account has not been associated anywhere, especially at the site level. As a side note, assessment templates cannot be deleted. Instead, they have to be inactivated by unchecking the active flag for the assessment records. Then it won't display in the assessment drop-down list. So let's move on to templates. So for trip report templates, the best practice for trip report templates is really to refrain from creating protocol or product-specific templates, if at all possible. Instead, defining one organizational standard template for each type of monitoring visit, like initiation, monitoring, closeout, that's going to be more effective because it's easier maintenance. You can utilize the checklist items to make your templates a bit more generic. So if at all possible, this is what we recommend. Again, it makes maintenance easier, but if you are creating protocol-specific templates, be sure to, at the template level, assign them to the protocol so those protocol-specific ones don't show up for other studies within the application. As you may know, document and activity templates are used in Siebel Clinical to standardize the documents and tasks that are associated with a clinical trial. Again, always attempt to make these templates as generic as possible, based on some standard SOPs, instead of making them, again, protocol specific. So in other words, we want to not enter in the protocol title field of the template, because then the template will be only available for that for use within that specific protocol. The creation of generic or global templates is going to reduce the number of available templates, and it also minimizes user confusion about which template they should be selecting and using. So if a protocol is quite different from your user protocols or requires many additional documents or activities to be tracked, one of the best practices is to copy the most comparable generic or global template and then make it specific for that protocol. So you're still using your standard, but then you're making modifications that are only specific for that particular study. So in Siebel CTMS, a subject visit template is created to facilitate the consistent application of the protocol across all sites and subjects. The template is used to set up subject visit schedules and activities according to the guidelines that are laid out in the protocol, and is then used to generate screening, rescreening, enrollment schedules for each of the subjects based on the subject's scheduled dates. So the concept of visit lead time in this subject visit schedule within Siebel Clinical can be confusing, but it must be understood in order to set up the subject visit template correctly. So for the first visit in the subject visit template, the lead time is going to be 0 days typically, because that's your first visit within that scheduled period. Then the subsequent visits in that schedule are going to have lead times associated to the schedule, so they can project the scheduled dates for subsequent visits. So for example, for the remaining enrollment visits, the lead time is going to be the time from the subject's first visit date until each of the subsequent scheduled visits. So the lead time for visit 2, which is scheduled to occur 2 weeks after the first visit, would be 2, and then the lead unit would be weeks, or you can do 14 as the lead time, and the lead unit would be days. So visit 3, if it's scheduled 4 weeks out, again, you're still going to make it from visit 1 what that lead time is, so you would make it potentially 4 weeks or 28 days. So that's how you sort of build that schedule with the lead time. If the lead times aren't defined in the subject visit template, then all of the subject visit dates will be calculated incorrectly. So they're going to project out to be planned for the same day. So that lead time is going to be pretty important. The use of min and max units, if you're tracking that, is also important for the trial. So you can have that. So based on the plan date, based on your lead time, you can have a min and max window of 2 days or whatever the protocol calls for. So we're going to discuss a little bit more about this when we talk about protocol amendments, but when there's a need to create a new version of the SPT or the protocol, the best practice is really to copy that existing version and then edit the visits, the activities that are necessary. And this also saves a lot of time. An important fact to know about this SPT, we mentioned it earlier, it should never be deleted, even if it's been applied to even one subject. So if you do that, it's going to have subsequent, sort of disappearance of some of that data for those particular subjects where you've applied that template. The team members, we recommend making it a standard practice to save the protocol or region or site record before you're adding any team members. Also, remember that you can add a member to the same team only once. Otherwise, you're going to receive an error message. Removing team members, if they should no longer have access to the protocol region or site, is something that we recommend. But even though you remove that team member, the team history is still maintained. So on the team history view, that still shows that they were part of that team. Another time saver shortcut is utilizing the position roll down and position roll up options wherever available. So you can apply that at one level of the hierarchy and roll down the team across the region and the site. But just remember, If you use that physician roll down option at the protocol level, the team members will only roll down to the existing region and the existing site. So when you create new regions or new sites, it's not going to, that team's not going to automatically be applied. A clinical program in Siebel CTMS is a logical grouping of protocols. So using the clinical program explorer view to see an overall clinical hierarchy under the clinical program is really effective. This information is displayed in a useful exploratory view format with record details of the selected file, or folder on the left-hand side being displayed in the right-hand side of the view. So this is a really key view when they're dealing with clinical executives that want to see program-level details, but also kind of look at what makes up that particular program. For each site associated with a protocol, we want to maintain a current list of all site staff and their roles in terms of study-specific responsibilities. You want to include relevant contact information such as addresses, phone and fax numbers, and email addresses. You want to keep a list current as staff and information or responsibilities change. You can also track the start and end dates for site contacts in reference to their trial participation from that particular site. So you can keep that history, for those site contacts as well. So for site visits, we recommend creating a list of scheduled site visits as soon as that information is available. This process is going to provide metrics around planned and actual visit dates, and may also help identify how often site visits are rescheduled and why. Advanced planning also helps CRAs create and maintain a master study schedule for reference and planning purposes, and it also can help study managers gauge resource planning and study projects. So we talked about briefly protocol amendments before, but when a protocol amendment occurs mid-study, but the visit schedule that we talked about earlier is not effective. So the only thing that we're doing is we're doing a protocol amendment and we're tracking that amendment has occurred, but the visit schedule is not effective. Then the only thing you really need to do within Siebel CTMS is to update the protocol version number at that protocol administration level under protocol version. If, however, the visits, the activities, or the associated payment schedule is affected by the protocol amendment, then the following additional tasks need to be completed. So you need to create a new version of the existing subject visit template for that study. So either you do that by creating a new subject visit template that addresses those amendment items, or like we mentioned earlier, creating a new version of the existing subject visit schedule for that study, and then you just make your appropriate changes to the visits and the activities that are affected by that amendment. So that saves a lot of time, when you're copying that version and that shortcut. So next, once you've made that, you need to apply that new version of the subject visit schedule to all of the applicable sites. And that's done through the site management versions field, and make sure that the new version is active by entering in the appropriate subject visit schedule active or IRB approval date. And then the next thing you need to do is apply that new amendment to the enrolled subjects by either clicking the Apply Active Version button under Site Management, subjectively if we're doing it across all subjects that are enrolled, or do it by subject by subject. So some of the amendments that you've made, they may not apply to some of the subjects that may be further along within the protocol. So that's really what the process is going to dictate what you're actually going to be doing within the system. So one thing to note is if you apply that Apply Active Version button at the subject level, the new subject visit template version is applied to the subjects where still currently enrolled, so not completed or early terminated. and then the informed consent date is going to be left blank, and they, since each of those subjects would have potentially a different informed consent date when they sign, if they need to be re-consented for that amendment. So once the new version of the subject visit schedule is applied to the subject must then be enrolled under the new version. And so to do this, the user will navigate to the subject screen, drills down to the screen number, the subject number of the enrolled subject, whose schedule needs to be updated for the revised subject visit template. So this is where you're going to click the schedule button again to apply those new visits. And the system is going to prompt the user on whether uncompleted visits from the old version and the corresponding completed visits from the new version need to be deleted. So the user will select OK in the response to this message if the following criteria are met, and this is important. So the IRB approval dates for the modified SVT is greater than the new SVT created date. And so they've they've approved the IRB approval date at the site level, and then the subject informed consent date is also after that subject visit template. So if it in fact applies, it's going to make those modifications and remove things that are no longer applicable to that subject. And if you select cancel, what's going to happen is all of the new version visits are going to be appended to the existing visits view, and no visits are deleted. So then the user can then manually delete what doesn't apply to that subject. But the system, based on the proper setup, is going to, in the first scenario, is going to delete and hide the things that are not relevant to that subject based on what you've entered for informed consent and in the new version for that particular subject. We often receive questions about how to track various kinds of expenses and payments within Siebel CTMS. So we encourage companies to track study startup and other sort of study expenses at a configured protocol expenses view instead of waiting until the sites are created. So you obviously have expenses that are related to the study itself outside of site payments. So this can be done again through a configured view. There's no real. There is a project cost module that allows you to do something similar, but this essentially will provide a picture of all study-related expenses in a single location. Users also worry about when they've made erroneous payment requests or actual payments to the site, and to address that, a payment request that has not yet been paid for and is known to contain wrong payment activities or amounts, you can simply delete that payment request. So, in that instance, you can delete the record, but what happens is, since we didn't pay for it yet, the payment activities that are associated to that payment request are going to be available for selection in the payment activities view again, and then you can generate a corrected payment request with the applicable payment activities for processing. To address the payment where the status is paid that's been erroneously created, you can actually do ad hoc payments or payment activities of a negative amount to counteract, let's say, overpayment. And so there's that capability. So if you've overpaid, for example, you can actually create a payment activity of a negative to recoup some of that, and that'll be incorporated and calculated on the next payment that you generate for that particular site. The system does a really nice job of calculating final payments as well. So once the study is closed and the site final payment is due, what you're going to do is follow these steps of first generating a payment request of all of the completed payment activities, and actually routing that through payment, through a routine payment, and then confirm that all those paid payments requests have status as paid, and then the appropriate payment has also been entered. And then in that same view, under under Payments View, you're going to create a new payment with a payment type of final payment. And this final payment type, this action causes the system to auto-populate the requested amount field by subtracting what you've already paid to date from the earned to date amount. So if you've been withholding payments and have a withhold percentage and things like that, that final payment essentially adds up everything that we owe to the site. So it adds up all the amounts and it'll automatically calculate what your final payment needs to be. So still have a number of things to go over, so I apologize again if we run over, if I go a little quickly here. But one of the most powerful features of Siebel Clinical is really the ability for the users to narrow down their list of records, create ad hoc reports with querying of list applets within the application. Queries can be simple or complex. You can save them to be run again in the future, and even saved and shared with all users within the system. So here's just a few key things to know about the query functionality. Usually a basic query is going to be case sensitive, so you must enter the exact case of the term that you wish to use for. The application also has wildcard characters, so you can use an asterisk at the beginning of or the end of your search term to bring back results that end or begin with your search term. So you can use that wildcard asterisk by with some of your criteria. You can also use the asterisk by itself to find all records where any value has been entered in a certain field. The opposite, if you enter in the is null in a query field, it's going to return all records that have no value in that field when it's returned. A user can also search for multiple terms in a single field by using the AND or operators as well. So if you're looking for a particular field that has this value or this value, you can actually use that OR operator as well. After receiving your query results, you can actually refine your query by clicking the query menu in the application level menu and selecting Refine Query. You can also, from the menu, click Refine Query or use the shortcut Alt-R. Users are also able to create dynamic queries for things like dates. So think about document expiration dates. We want to find documents that are already expired, so you can enter in less than, and then with today with the close and open and close parentheses to return expired documents, or even enter in today plus 30 to return expired documents and those that will expire in the next 30 days. So that's a dynamic query. If you enter in a specific date in the query term, make sure you use the date format that's specific to your implementation. But if you save that, it's only going to save that key date that you put in there. So using the today function, that actually allows it to be more dynamic when you save that query. Queries can get even easier when you're using Query Assistant. So when you're using multiple fields, you can actually use this Query Assistant, and this is actually a way to do case-insensitive queries as well. Also, rather than having to remember all of the query operators yourself, the Query Assistant can do that for you. So the Query Assistant button becomes available once you hit Query, and then you can hit the Query button and then go into that Query Assistant mode to make sure queries are easier. And if you run a query on a regular basis, you might also notice you can save that query, and it'll be available to you as a user that's logged in by hitting the query menu option and saving that query, and you can name it whatever you want. If in fact you want to have that query be visible for all users, you can actually ask your system administrator to make the query that you just saved public, and then it's going to be available to all users, and that's going to be considered a predefined query. So a predefined query can be run against all the data in the current screen. Even if you have run a query to narrow down the data set, that predefined query always uses all the data within the screen. So it's a nice way to standardize the way that you're filtering data across the application. And the final query note is to clear query results and return to all records. You can simply hit query and then go immediately without entering any search terms or operators, and it refreshes your screen. Reports. Reports can be generated in a variety of different ways. We have canned or predefined reports that can be generated by clicking the report button on the toolbar of the specific screens. And here's an example of a site contact report in PDF format. We also have Excel exports. So these are basically a data dump of the list applet information into an Excel worksheet format. So you can export any list applet into an Excel export. And the best practice here is really going to be to sort and arrange your columns and query the data before you export your records. Quick print are HTML snapshots of the current view, similar to Excel exports. The best practice is going to be to sort and arrange your columns before clicking the quick print icon so that the only data that you want is going to be displayed. How much of a view displays in a quick print is defined under user preferences, printing view, general behavior section of each user, and the recommended preferred settings are displayed in this slide with the exception of the second option on the left-hand side. That should also say all applets in view, but everything else applies here. In Siebel CTMS 8.1 and higher, the My BIP reports or My BI Publisher reports option allows you to retrieve reports that are to be ran at different points in time. So you can, since the number of reports that you run can rapidly accumulate and take a valuable service space, it's also recommended that these reports be purged on a regular basis or a monthly basis. So by that time, the report needs to be saved or stored locally or on a shared drive or some other document management system. But you do have this option of looking at your own reports that you've run over time. And it's also recommended that only administrators perform the task of purging or deleting these reports. Again, the risk of inadvertently deleting reports that are stored on the server that should be designated to an administrator. So change control. So typically, once users start utilizing the CTMS on a regular basis, they discover changes or enhancements that they want to make and see in future phases. So really, an organized method of tracking these changes and enhancement requests is going to be suggested. A change or enhancement form that is submitted to a specific individual is one way of tracking this information. So we need to be able to evaluate these requests. Our experience has shown that many changes are requested to support an outdated potentially business process only because it has always been done that way. So we encourage business units and to consider whether it would be better to improve the existing business practice or process instead of spending time and expense on what might be an expensive system change. But therefore, all recommended changes should be thoroughly vetted and prioritized in a standard way. So we're getting to the tail end of our presentation. I apologize for going over here. But in addition to some of these best practices, I do want to point out some additional tips and tricks that can come in handy with Siebel CTMS. Email fields that are in the system, you can actually use them to for context, you can actually enter in multiple email addresses for contact by separating them by comments. You should also remember for undoing record, that option is only available once the record has not been saved yet. Once it's saved, you actually have to make the change itself. If you right-click in a form or a list applet, you can access some of the menu actions from the menu button. The thread bar helps keep track of your navigational path. So when you're drilling down into hyperlinks from one view to another, your thread bar is actually going to be built that way. So you can actually return to a previous point in your path by clicking on the corresponding name or description in the thread bar. When you drill across screens and views, you see record hyperlinks to remain in the same thread. So once you click on a screen or a view tab, that bar is going to be reset once you navigate to another screen. Next, sorting a large number of records, like contacts or documents. It can be really slow if you're looking at sort of all of those records. So instead, it's better to query your list first and then sort it. So that becomes a performance, better performance if you're doing that. Advanced sort is the ability to sort your records in the list applet by up to 3 criteria. Remember that make sure that your sort order is logical. So for example, sorting addresses by country, then state, and then city, instead of by city, then state, then country. Users can also change multiple fields at the same time. You can select multiple records and send, for example, change the sent date of multiple documents since you're sending them out at the same date. So you can do that and actually change the existing value for up to 4 fields at a time using that change records option. You can save a Siebel Clinical chart for use in other applications. So when you're on a charts view, we've had some various success in doing this in different versions of Siebel, but what we found is this option of Alt Control right click and saving a picture works really well. So you can utilize this to grab those charts and save that image. And this next one is around freezing columns. So this works differently across different versions of Siebel as well. So prior to OpenUI, you can actually double-click the rightmost column you want to freeze, and also double-click it again if you want to unfreeze. And when you're going to OpenUI, before IP 2014, actually the freeze and lock columns doesn't work. So for IP 2014 and above, now they reintroduced that freeze column feature, but it works slightly differently. When you're on the column header, you'll have once you click it, you have the option to lock or unlock the column header to be able to freeze those columns. Next couple things that we just mentioned is when you're logging out of the application, try to do it through the file and log out in the application menu, and that's going to ensure that your most recent changes have been saved, and it also avoids having hanging sessions in the database where the database resources potentially affect performance for other users. So again, that's a recommended way of logging out of the application. I think the next slide is the last slide. For some of the recent versions of Siebel, and actually the web browser back and forward buttons and the web browser history are actually, you can actually utilize those to move backward and forward from where you've navigated to. That didn't necessarily work in previous versions of Siebel. So recent versions, that's available, and some users aren't familiar with that. So this can help with navigation quite a bit, as those are inherently working with Siebel now. So that is the last slide. Again, I apologize for going over, but we'll, I don't know if we have a list of questions, Eugene, but I'll pass it on to you and see if we want to address some of the questions that have come up.
Sure. So at the moment we don't have any questions, but we can take 30 seconds to see if anybody has specific questions regarding best practices or the unique situation with CTMS. And while we're waiting, I'll just tell you guys that you can join us for our next webinar. And let's see, here we go. It takes place October 15th, and this will be focused on Oracle's clinical data warehousing product called Life Sciences Data Hub. So we'll be presenting that on October 15th, and be sure to follow us on the various social media outlets, and you can read our blog as well. So we're just getting a few comments. You guys are welcome. So it looks like no, let's see. So the next CTMS webinar has not been planned yet. So we'll get back to you when the next one is scheduled. You can also take a look at the website for our schedule. We always post that right away, so you can be sure to check that out.
Yeah, and if you do have any questions on any of the content today or have any questions, you can obviously reach out to us as well. We'll be happy to take those individually. I hope today's session has been valuable. I also do want to mention, so next month we are doing a session at Oracle Open World. If anyone is headed out to that, and it's going to be on risk-based monitoring. So if anyone finds that interesting, please look at the schedule for Oracle Open World for that session. Again, thank you for attending today. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me directly.
Perfect. Thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you, Param, for presenting. Take care.